It's finally happening. Things are slowly getting better for drivers. As you can see in New York, thousands of rideshare drivers in New York City will soon see some money heading their way. New York Attorney General announced Thursday that drivers will soon be able to apply for settlement funds stemming from a historic lawsuit. Like I mentioned in numerous videos, in November, Uber and Lyft agreed to pay $328 million for settlement for not properly paying drivers for years. Beginning March 1st of 2024, those drivers will be able to apply for back pay. All rideshare drivers will also start receiving paid sick leave and a minimum pay rate. Now, this is huge, right? For all the drivers out there in New York City. I know, unfortunately, it's just New York, but remember, like I've mentioned in a lot of other videos, this, in my opinion, will have a ripple effect on the rest of the country. Also, too, as a funny side note, that is the whole article. Typically, as most of you know, I have like the side-by-side comparison when it comes to articles. Typically back in the day, which is funny, I had the article and then me in the corner a little bit. You could like kind of barely see me. And then I was like, oh, I think it's a bit better to have like the production of the video be side by side. And then this one I'll say just to like the kind of voiceover, because this is the whole article. Easily the shortest article I've ever covered or reviewed on this channel, but I think for a good reason. I mean, that's all we need to know. Starting March 1st, 2024, it's starting to change in terms of, you know, drivers being able to apply to get the money they deserve, minimum hourly guarantees, the minimum pay, of course, things like paid sick leave, etc., etc. This is game changing. You know, I know in the past few months, and I mentioned this, I like to be very transparent on this channel, and I hate YouTubers that only take a negative stance. And let's be honest, negative, as I said before in videos, it's very relevant for something like this, that negative titles and stuff like that, I'm not saying it's clickbaity, but negative stuff gets more attention. If I do a video saying, oh, you can't believe what Uber and Lyft is doing to screw over its drivers, it's gonna get way more views than me doing a video being like, you never believe the good thing that Uber and Lyft did for their drivers. Very few people care, right? So I do try to be very balanced, I feel like, when it comes to the positive and negative coverage, if that's the right word, I do about all the current topics going on in the ride-sharing world. And this in general is a big one, and I'm really happy to see this because although this was, in a sense, inevitable, after that lawsuit, which I already did a video about, the fact that, you know, they had to pay $328 million and everything, although that is, let's be honest, a bit of a drop in the bucket when it comes to Uber and Lyft, I don't care as much about the money of the lawsuit as more as the implication of the future of ride-sharing as a result of that lawsuit. Granted, like I said, it is centralized around New York, given that area. And it is weird, you know, it's just one of those things when it comes to America that different cities and states have different rules. You know, I've done a bunch of videos about the Uber and Lyft requirements, like say when it comes to driving. Every city and state has different rules, right? So it is very, very annoying and frustrating that this is only in New York, but I could see this having a ripple effect. I mean, like I said in so many other videos, you have California with Prop 22, New York having this huge issue. Arguably, I don't know if I could give like an exact statistical thing when it comes to this, but I feel like you can argue that California and New York are two of the biggest and most focused on states in the entire country, in the United States, that hover around the entertainment industry, right? If you want to be an actor, for example, you do New York or LA, right? That's kind of what you have to do and what you have to pick. And I think that when you have a state like California, with places like Los Angeles and then San Francisco and everything going on here, and then you have a major hotspot like New York, you could argue those are two of the biggest cities and areas. And I think that when you look at the two biggest areas, now both having a situation coming into play of minimum hourly guarantees, paid sick leave, more protections for drivers, even though they're staying as independent contractors, I think it's like, okay, if the two heavy hitters, so to speak, are doing this, I can see a lot of the other states following suit. Now, granted, it is also going to be interesting because March is going to be a big year for ride sharing, which means I'll have to do more and more videos about it. I try to keep up to date as best I can, post these videos as quick as I can, you know, but it's going to be interesting because I already did a video about what's going on with this new federal kind of law when it comes to being an independent contractor and the protections you get or lack of protections and everything. That is going to be implemented in March as well. The ramifications of that are tricky, right? I've already done a video about that where I really went in depth about this whole article talking about it because it's going to be really interesting to see what happens where in some cases, after this whole law gets passed, maybe nothing changes for rideshare drivers maybe it does. It's one of those things that, in practicality versus on paper, who knows what's going to be the result? Like I've said in numerous videos, my favorite quote is knowledge is knowing a tomato's a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. So how that's going to go is going to be very interesting. But I think what I'm noticing now with Prop 22 happening in California, now this happening in New York, and it wasn't just the lawsuit now and everything. Now this is going retroactive and proactive. Now drivers can apply, like they said, for the money they deserve that they didn't get. In addition, moving forward, drivers are going to have things like paid sick leave, minimum pay, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these things are now coming into play with California and New York. And now the federal government is doing like a nationwide thing when it comes to being an independent contractor. Independent contractors, basically rideshare drivers, being screwed over. What this is showing is that the pendulum is slowly moving towards a different direction. That rideshare drivers are now getting the protections they deserve while staying as independent contractors, which I think for a lot of drivers is kind of like the best case scenario. Because I've done some kind of commentary about should drivers be independent contractors or employees. I've gone back and forth. I was on a huge stance of drivers staying as employees. My biggest thing was the protection. But if you can be an independent contractor and have employee-like protections, that's kind of the best case scenario, right? If you get employee-like stuff, if you get benefits, I know here in California, for example, things like health insurance and whatnot are now things that drivers are now able to get as a result of Prop 22, right? So there's things that are moving in a very positive direction when it comes to ride sharing, mainly because of protection. And I gotta be honest, I think it's never been a more important time for that. With things like I've talked about in numerous videos, right? I've done a bunch of videos about like, should you drive for Lyft and Uber in 2024? I talked about delivery driving well as well in a whole other video. I've talked about a lot of negative stuff. And especially when you look at too many drivers being on the road. And, I've said this before in numerous videos, so I'm gonna recap this quick. There's gonna be more drivers on the road, and there is, more drivers on the road than ever before. More people are also signing up. So it's not like that's gonna stop. Uber and Lyft paying people way less than before. Things are more expensive as a result of inflation. And then lastly, Uber and Lyft is taking a bigger cut. I saw somebody just post this that I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, it was in Boston, which is where I used to drive, ironically, that I think their husband or their wife or someone they know is a CPA, and that Uber and Lyft takes about like 60% of their earnings. When I was driving, way back when in 2015 in Boston, it was a hard 20% for both Uber and Lyft. If I made $100, 20 would go to Uber and Lyft, 80 went to me. I thought that was fair. I was like, I have no problem giving 20%. They find all the riders for me, right? They find everybody for me. I turn on the app, it does all the work for me. If they have to take 20%, I get that. But now that they're taking 60% on top of too many drivers being on the road, on top of inflation, on top of all this kind of stuff I'm mentioning, it's getting a lot worse for drivers. And I think back in the day, it's not that drivers didn't or did have protection. It was just too much of a gray area. I think years ago in 2015, when it kind of came about, we didn't really know how to classify. It's like, do drivers, should they have a driver's license? Well, obviously they do, but like, do they need an extra driver's license, like a specialty license? Like if you're being a truck driver, of course you need to be certified. Should they be the same for rideshare drivers? Like, is it similar to a taxi where they should have commercial plates? I remember that was a discussion. So I think we didn't really know where Lyft and Uber was or is or how to exactly put it. And I think we still don't, in a sense. But I think as time has gone on, I think we've gotten more concrete about what Lyft and Uber is and how it's, I mean, let's be honest, ride sharing is a huge staple in our society. If ride sharing went away tomorrow, we'd all be, not that we'd all be screwed, but it's such a necessary thing, I think, for numerous reasons, right? And as a result of that, I think now, finally, there is being legislation put forward about how to make sure that now we understand better about what ride sharing is, better about the concept that, okay, rideshare drivers are kind of independent contractors, but also don't have any protections. This is a huge leg forward. Now, what will happen in the rest of this year, it is really, really tough to say. I know a lot of drivers are probably watching this video being like, well, Mark, great for New York drivers, but what about me? I live in Virginia. I live in Nebraska. I live in Colorado, et cetera, et cetera. I do think that I do think this will have a ripple effect in two different ways. One, like I said, what's happening federally when it comes to this huge legislation now being put forward in March, ironically at around the same exact time. The second thing, though, is I feel like this is something I can see other states following suit for in terms of looking at what happened in New York and saying, all right, California did it, New York did it, we're also going to do it, right? I know like in Minnesota, there's been talk about this. There's been different rules that I've heard popping up in different states. You know, I do try to keep track of all the news going on because it is very annoying and frustrating, I think, for a lot of drivers out there that your driving experience, and I mentioned before, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make when driving. It is kind of frustrating that, like, if, like, say you're driving in a place like New York, for example, and you have to move to Wyoming. I don't know why that, Wyoming. You want to go skiing and snowboarding more. I don't know. That your experience could be night and day, not just because of the logistics or all that other stuff, which is very important, but mainly because of the law. And I hope that this is something that starts getting more and more precedent and more of a pressing matter because, like I said before, ride sharing, people were like, I don't know what to classify it as, and we'll figure it out. Now, everybody takes Lyfts and Ubers. It's not a secret anymore. I'm not saying it was, but like, I think now with everybody knowing about Lyft and Uber, like ride sharing, if you think about it, it's kind of crazy to think. 10 years ago, only a decade ago, the word ride sharing wasn't even a phrase or a word, right? Now, everybody knows about ride sharing. Now, ride sharing, I think, is something that's permanently in our human society forever, unless we get like teleportation or something crazy. I don't know. But ride sharing will always be, I think, a staple in our society that didn't even exist 10 years ago, right? Things like taxis and limousines and someone basically picking you up and dropping you off has always existed, right? Probably from the horse and carriage days, even. There's like Uber horse in a sense, right? Like you'd order a taxi and the taxi was some dude and like a horse and carriage and you jump on it. I don't know. But now though, ride sharing is such a staple in our society that I think now that it's such a commonplace, now everything is progressing forward for people to be like, okay, we need to add more protection for drivers. And I think this, although he's small, pretty short, but pretty sweet article, this is an indication of that. That it's another kind of step forward. Because I know a lot of my videos, I think in the past few months, maybe even the past 6 months, have been more negative. I like to be very transparent on this channel, and it's tough. It's like the definition of cognitive dissonance, where I know as a YouTuber, if I post a video title, not saying it's clickbait, but if I post a video title talking about, Lyft and Uber's the worst, you can't even imagine what they're doing to their drivers, that's going to get a lot of hits. It's negative attention, negative news. I remember learning this in school and psychology, will always get way more views. On the other end, if I did a video saying, oh, this is an amazing thing that happened with Uber and Lyft, it's going to do meh. I've done videos, and I've even tested this. 5 reasons why you shouldn't drive. 5 reasons why you should drive. When I say the reasons why you shouldn't drive, more people is going to watch that video, right? So on one end, I do know this is going to get more views, more clicks. Of course, that equals more money for me, right? That when it comes to my YouTube analytics, that equals more revenue. But at the same time, I don't want to constantly be bashing Lyft and Uber because there are a lot of good things about Lyft and Uber. And I've said that before, that, for a lot of people out there, even though they might not go out of their way to talk about it, I have interviewed a lot of drivers, and I will be doing a video, by the way, maybe next week about all the big things I've learned, because I've interviewed at this point over 1,000 drivers. So I'm going to be doing like a video of like the 5 things I've learned after interviewing so many drivers. But I will say a lot of drivers do love Lyft and Uber. They have flexible schedule, instant cash outs, a low barrier to entry, decent, I say decent, hourly pay depending on your location. There are a lot of benefits, but I haven't really talked about those. And this video I feel like is one of the few, at least in the past 6 months, positive videos I've done talking about Lyft and Uber. And that's really why I really want to make this point that although I know I've been very negative, it's tough because I also like to be transparent. And when it comes to being transparent, there's been a lot of negative stuff about being a driver. Now, though, more than ever before, things are looking up. I think although this was inevitable, like this was kind of, I think, part of that lawsuit that they talked about, it's kind of one of those things where you're like, okay, I know what's coming, but now that it's actually here, now that March 1st is now the exact date where things are going to be kicking into a different gear, where drivers can get back pay, and it's both retroactive and then also proactive, huge leg up for drivers. And I know it's only in New York City, but March of 2024 could be a legendary month. Legendary month with this happening in New York. And then with the fact that the whole federal thing happening, I don't know how that's going to come and play with Uber and Lyft. It could be the Wild Wild West. I don't know, because I've done a whole analysis of that video that's so gray in terms of the law and legislation that you could argue that drivers get more protections now, but also might give Lyft and Uber an excuse to give them less protections. So that could go either way. That actually is a bit of a it's a bit of a tricky scale to balance of which way it's going to weigh. I guess, was that pun or whatever? But at the end of the day, this is the biggest thing. This is huge. This is absolutely huge, and I'm really happy that this is now finally happening for drivers. It's been a long time coming. And again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, and I'm predicting this, saying it now, and I've said it in videos even last year and the year before, that this happening in places like California and New York, it's only inevitable, in my opinion, that it's going to cause a ripple effect around the rest of the country, which can only prove better for drivers.